Hey there, welcome back. Today we're going to go ahead and show you how to perform a repair on a Ford drum out of a 700R4 4L60E in cases where there is leakage occurring between where the shaft is pressed into the drum. Now, if you know anything about these transmissions at all, you know that the 3/4 clutch pack is the most problematic, most frequently reported failure point in these units, and it's the reason why I would say 95% of them come across my bench, and that's true, more or less universally. So in my estimation, based on my own knowledge, experience, along with everything else I've read and watched and whatever, all the information I've been gathering over the years, the chief culprit in 3/4 clutch failure, especially premature failure, especially after a rebuild, is leaking assemblies where the shaft's pressed into the drum at the 2-3 feed location. So the 2-3 feed is going to be right here, and what we're going to do is we're going to put some fluid here at the pocket after we remove the bearing and the selective spacer. We're going to go ahead and put fluid here, and then we're going to charge this circuit with air and see if there are bubbles appearing here at the base of the shaft where it's pressed into the drum. I have the drum itself assembled part way up to the point where we have the forward return spring and snap ring installed. So it's my recommendation you actually do this test with the drum completely assembled with the clutch packs and everything in it. I mean, you don't have to have the sprag in there, but if you're going to do it like this with just the pistons and such installed, then I would recommend you use no more than about 50 psi of air to charge each one of these circuits. So the concept is that when we remove the shaft, we clean out the drum completely. We apply this Loctite 609 retaining compound to the portion of the shaft that gets pressed into the drum, as well as the female splines in the drum itself, and we press the shaft back in. And that, in theory, should seal off all of the areas of leakage, the wear and imperfections within the drum itself that's driving those leaks, so that the drum can be restored to service. Now, sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on how bad the drum's leaking and to what extent the drum itself's worn. So it's one of those kind of last-ditch effort, takes a little bit of time, but if you can pull it off, you may be able to salvage your drum versus having to go spend money on a new one. Now, the risk reward is not as favorable for these earlier style drums because they're not that expensive, but if you have a later 4L60E that went in behind an LS based engine, your Gen 3 small blocks, LS1, LS6, LS2, and then all the truck engines, the 4.8, 5.3, 6 liter, etc., that took these transmissions, those drum assemblies are expensive, anywhere from 125 to 200 bucks, especially for the ones that take the little reluctor gear for the input speed sensors. Alright, so I have about 75 psi or so air, so I got to be real careful when I charge each circuit because I don't want to pop out any of the apply pistons. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to test the 2-3 feed. And by the way, this drum was featured in the 700R4 teardown, rebuild gone wrong video, so I know for a fact it leaks. So if you haven't watched that video, go ahead and check it out, but you'll see me conduct the test here as well. So we'll do the test, we'll see the leaks, and then we're going to disassemble the drum, get over to the press, remove the shaft from the drum itself, clean the drum, and then we'll go ahead and apply our Loctite where we need to reinstall the shaft, and then I'm going to give it some time to cure and set. And then from there, we'll go ahead and do a retest. Now, I will say, and this is the final point I'll make before we actually do the test, there's been like some, I guess, growing chatter around doing these pressure tests with the drum and the fluid at operating temperature. And what folks are doing is taking containers, filling them up with fluid, like metal pots or something, putting them on hot plates, then sticking the drum fully assembled into the pot filled with transmission fluid, say somewhere up to here, and then they will turn the hot plate on and heat the fluid to about 170, 180 degrees, and then they will conduct the test, because there's some evidence to suggest that a certain percentage of these drums are going to pass the room temperature test but fail the hot test. And of course the hot test is as close as we can get to replicating operating conditions. So you know, if that has occurred to you, or if you're wondering about that, it's definitely something I'm considering also, and I'll do a separate video once I get my hot plate in, and you know, we can see if and I'll use the same drum, and we can see if this repair, if it's successful in terms of the cold pressure test, if it still holds up under temperature. All right, let me reposition the camera so you can see, you know, a little bit better into the pocket there, and then we'll go ahead and do the test. All right, so all I'm going to do is pour a little bit of transmission fluid here at the base. You don't need a ton of it, just enough to fully submerge the you know, location all the way around the diameter of the shaft, and this way you can make sure that air will either reveal bubbles or not, but the test will be valid. You don't want it only partially submerged. Okay, so like I said, we're not going to use a ton of air. I'm only going to probably depress the nozzle like this. And that's it. That's about maybe 30 psi, if that. Here are our bubbles. Alright, so this is kind of middle of the road in terms of severity, and all the drums I've tested. Some, you know, you'll barely have any bubbles show up. Other ones, I mean, it'll be like Old Faithful. So when they're really, really bad, a lot of times the shaft's already loose. It's not even a press fit anymore. Okay, let's go ahead and clean up this fluid, and then I'll go ahead and get you over to the press. After this drum's disassembled, we'll go ahead and remove the shaft. Alright, we have the drum chucked up in the press, so we're just going to apply, you know, press force to get that shaft out. Given how much I have already on the ram, I'm probably going to have to insert another press tool in between, which you see here, to you know, fully dislodge it. So there goes. There we go, most of the way out. So this should do it. Alright. A little sloppy, but the main thing is I didn't want the shaft itself falling onto the ground. Alright, back to the bench. Okay, so the objective here is to clean this drum completely to the extent we can, and then thoroughly inspect the splines. There's no point in even proceeding with the repair if we see damaged splines. So anything that indicates that the splines are excessively worn, there's chunks or, you know, pieces missing out of them, fractures in the drum itself, that's what you really want to look for, especially in a drum that may have been repaired a few times, which, you know, as we're getting on in years, that's certainly a possibility. Okay, this is where the drum's actually pressed in. This is the feed circuits. You can see them here. So when you have leaks, it's because there's, you know, some sort of imperfection or defect in this area here, or possibly on the shaft itself. So I'm going to see each of the feed circuits. This would be the, let's see, 1, 2, 3. This is going to be your 2, 3 feed. This is your 2, 3 feed. I believe this is actually your lube circuit. So here's the 2, 3 feed. It looks like we have what could be described as defects in the drum. I'm sorry, the shaft. Drum shaft. It's like mixing up your left from your right. You get a little better view of that. Get it to focus. So once you have the two pieces apart, you can certainly make a judgment call to see if it's more prudent and where you have a higher chance of success in simply installing a different shaft of the same design. So I'm going to go ahead and dig into my drawer. I have a whole bunch of extra shafts. I'm going to see if I actually have a different shaft. This one looks like it's seen better days, you know, down in this area where you would have wear that would lead to leaks, you know, under pressure at the feed or apply circuits. Okay, so here is the shaft that came out of this drum, and then here's a whole bunch of additional shafts that I've just collected over the years, just some examples to show you, along with some of the things that I look for when, you know, determining whether or not a shaft is a good candidate for repair like this. Okay, so this shaft here is identical to this shaft in every way, design-wise. And as I'm running my finger, or thumb rather, along the press fit portion, I could see wear, but I can't feel it. As I'm, you know, doing the same thing with the shaft that came out of there, I could feel a slight bit of wear. You know, like I could feel my fingernail kind of catching on some of these spots here. This is not as consequential, but when you have wear right next to the feed holes or in very close proximity, that's you know, kind of where you can get into trouble. Alright, now this method is not foolproof in terms of, like, you know, my visual inspection I'm doing. It's really just probability. I'm looking for the least amount of imperfections, a surface that has the least amount of defects. Like you can see here, this has a ton of defects. This is not a good candidate at all for rehabilitation. This is you know, the late 06 with the turbine speed sensor design, so that's by far the most expensive replacement assembly. I mean, they're $200 or more. I've seen them as high as $300 in, you know, certain places online like eBay. I would never pay that much for it, but I'm just saying. Alright, so again, the original shaft. The premise here is that the compound will fill in and kind of account for all these imperfections. So I'm just going to go with the original shaft and we're going to see what happens. Alright, so now that we have everything cleaned up, clean the inner diameter, the splines, as well as the surface here, we're ready to go ahead and apply our Loctite and then press the shaft back into the drum. So a couple things that you need to either know or just make an index so that you can keep track of. The shaft obviously does not go in any which way, right? It has to go in a certain way, and so it's going to have what's called a blind spline, and I have indicated that with the paint pen here. So the blind spline is where you have the two splines and they kind of come together and merge into one large spline, just like that. So you can call it a dual spline, I guess, if you want. There may be another more technical correct name for it, but it escapes me at the moment. Okay, now you're going to have the same matching female spline here in the drum. So it's basically another blind spline, and I've indexed it with a Sharpie. So what I want to do is I'm going to coat the surface here. Everything from roughly this point here, as you can see the differentiation and the wear pattern change from here down to the splines. Okay, if you want to coat the splines too, it's not going to hurt anything. I don't know that it's necessary. It's really this area that has to seal up, and then you want to do the same here. So do the best you can to try to keep this such that it's, you know, kind of evenly spread. So I'll just, you know, get it like this. And then I'm going to apply some here in the interior. And I kind of let it just spread all around the surface. Like I said, if some gets on the splines themselves, it's not the end of the world. Nobody, you know, I mean, I guess it might introduce a little bit more friction, but that's about it. Okay, I'm probably using what would appear to be somewhat of an excessive amount, but again, the main thing is you want this to seal. So here's your blind spline. Alright, now it's ready to go to the press and be pressed in. Okay, let's go back to the bench. All right, moment of truth. So either this repair took and was successful, at least thus far, on a room temperature test, or it's not. And, you know, we're basically going to end it here. If it passes, we'll go ahead and film a sequel to this where we will do a operating temperature test. But if it fails, there's no point in doing so. I have the compressor turned on, have about 75 psi. I do have a 3/4 clutch pack installed just to, you know, kind of prevent any issues with the third clutch piston. And one other thing I'll mention before we do the test, when you do this test, make sure that you install an O-ring at the base of the stator inside the drum. It's that O-ring that's about maybe this big around, and that's the only thing that's going to partition the forward clutch and the 3/4 clutch circuits. If you forget it, and you go to do this test, when you introduce air in the forward feed circuit, you're going to apply the 3/4 clutch, and it'll skew your results potentially. You know, you won't be able to differentiate which is which if you have, you know, a pass or a fail. You won't know if it's a forward clutch or the 3/4 clutch. All right, so let's go ahead and charge the circuit. So again, 70 psi. Just FYI, my tip isn't in the best of shape, so we're going to see if we can do, you know, the best we can to avoid a bunch of excess air coming out of that area of the tip. All right, that was about 10 seconds. No bubbles. All right, let's try it again. This time I'll do a countdown. So we'll charge a circuit. 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000, 6 1000, 7 1000, 8 1000, 9 1000, 10 1000. No bubbles. So 2 consecutive charges at 10 seconds in duration at 75 psi, and other than a little bit of disturbance of the fluid owing to, I should say, the crappy nozzle, we have no bubbles coming out of the area where the shaft is pressed into the drum. So that's good news. That tells me that the repair has a chance of being a legitimate method of restoring or reconditioning a drum where you have leaks at the base of the shaft. So in part 2, I'll go ahead and set up a hot plate. We meet again on a big pot. We will stick this drum just like you see it in here now, all assembled like this, and we will submerge it. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. And then we will heat that fluid on top of a hot plate to about 170, 180 degrees, somewhere in there. And then once it's all nice and hot at operating temperature, we'll go ahead and conduct the exact same test. And if it passes that test, 2 evolutions of 10 seconds worth of air charging into the circuit, then that'll at least tell us that this is a viable repair strategy for these drums, so that you don't have to go out and spend either 65 or 75 for a 298 millimeter style assembly, or twice to 2.5 times that for later model years that are of the 300 millimeter variety. So anyway, that's the video. That is part 1 in the books. So appreciate you watching. As always, if you have any questions, comments, go ahead and leave them below. If there's anything else you want me to get into when it comes to these transmissions, I'm always doing them. So don't hesitate to ask, and whenever I can, I'll prioritize making a video. And until we meet again for part 2, take care, have a great rest of your day or evening, and thank you so much again for taking time out of your day to watch my videos.